Control your child, or you will be removed." The words came cold, sharp, and laced with authority. At 30,000 feet in the air, every passenger froze. A young black mother, Naomi Carter, sat clutching her baby to her chest, rocking gently, whispering lullabies to calm his cries. Her eyes pleaded for patience, for understanding. The infant, barely 6 months old, had been fussing for only 10 minutes, a normal occurrence on any flight with babies. But Flight 447 wasn't just any flight. And Naomi Carter wasn't just any passenger. She had paid for a first-class seat with her own money, her designer diaper bag neatly stowed, her boarding pass clearly marked 1A. Yet from the moment she stepped onto that plane, the stares began. Whispers followed her down the aisle. "Are you sure you're in the right section?" one passenger had muttered. The flight attendant, Sandra Mills, a 15-year veteran with the airline, had been watching Naomi from takeoff. Every movement scrutinized. Every attempt to soothe her baby met with eye rolls and theatrical sighs. When little Marcus began crying due to ear pressure during ascent, Sandra's patience snapped. "Ma'am, I need you to quiet that child immediately," Sandra had hissed, leaning over Naomi's seat with barely concealed disgust. "I'm trying," Naomi whispered back, bouncing Marcus gently. "He's just uncomfortable from the altitude change. This is normal for babies." "Normal?" Sandra's voice grew louder, drawing attention from nearby passengers. "What's normal is consideration for other paying customers. Some of us actually belong in first class." The racism was subtle but unmistakable. Passengers shifted uncomfortably. A businessman in 2B lowered his newspaper. A woman across the aisle reached for her phone. That's when Naomi made a fatal mistake. She stood up for herself. "Excuse me, but I paid for this seat just like everyone else. My baby is not disturbing anyone unreasonably. Please give us a moment." Sandra's eyes flashed with rage. In that moment, something snapped. Maybe it was the long shift. Maybe it was the stress of dealing with difficult passengers. Or maybe it was something much darker. A prejudice that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. Without warning, the flight attendant's hand flew across her face. Slap! The crack echoed through the cabin like a gunshot. Naomi's baby screamed louder, passengers gasped, and the entire plane seemed to tilt in shock. Some reached for their phones. Others simply stared, wide-eyed, unable to believe what they had just witnessed. What no one knew was that this woman was the last passenger this airline should have ever dared to humiliate. Because the identity Naomi carried and the secret she held would not only destroy careers, but shake an entire industry to its knees. The cabin erupted. "Did you see that?" a passenger shouted. "She just assaulted a woman holding a baby." Phones lifted into the air, recording from every angle. The businessman in 2B immediately started live streaming to his 50,000 LinkedIn followers. A teenage influencer in 3A had already posted the video to TikTok, where it would rack up 2 million views before the plane landed. "Someone call the captain?" demanded an elderly woman. "This is assault." "I'm recording everything," announced another passenger. Her phone trained on Sandra, who now stood frozen in the aisle, the reality of her actions beginning to dawn on her face. But Naomi Carter didn't cry. She didn't shout. She didn't even flinch. Her cheek stung red, a perfect handprint blooming across her bronze skin. Her baby wailed in her arms, yet her eyes, calm, piercing, never left the flight attendant who had struck her. It was the kind of stare that said, "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." "Ma'am, I'm so sorry," stammered a male flight attendant who had rushed over. "Let me get you some ice for your face." Naomi's voice when she finally spoke was measured and deadly quiet. "I want the captain. I want this woman's name and employee number. And I want everything that just happened documented in the flight log." Sandra, realizing the gravity of her mistake, began backpedaling. I didn't mean to. The turbulence made me lose my balance." "There was no turbulence," Naomi replied coolly. "And 30 passengers just recorded you deliberately striking me while I held my infant son." For the rest of that flight, another 2 agonizing hours, the tension was unbearable. Passengers whispered in hushed tones, their conversations punctuated by words like lawsuit, viral, and career-ending. Crew members moved nervously up and down the aisle, avoiding eye contact with everyone. The captain had made an announcement apologizing for the incident and promising full investigation. Sandra Mills, once smug and authoritative, now avoided Naomi's gaze entirely. She had been relegated to the back galley, other crew members shooting her looks of disbelief and disgust. In 15 years of flying, she had never lost control like this. And deep down, she knew her career was over. Meanwhile, the digital wildfire was spreading. Flight Slap was trending worldwide. News outlets were picking up the story. Civil rights organizations were issuing statements. The airline's customer service lines were jammed with outraged callers demanding action. By the time the wheels hit the runway, the world outside that plane was already waiting. Dozens of reporters, police officers, and furious protesters had gathered at the arrival gate. The airline's crisis management team was in full panic mode. Executives huddled in emergency meetings, trying to figure out how to contain the damage. Still, Naomi said nothing to the media circus. She simply adjusted her baby's blanket, slung her designer bag over her shoulder, and walked past flashing cameras and shouting reporters like a woman on a mission. Her silence spoke louder than any statement could. And that's when the first secret cracked open. The airline thought the storm would pass. They had weathered controversies before. A public apology, maybe a suspension for Sandra, some diversity training, and the world would move on to the next viral outrage. They were catastrophically wrong. Naomi Carter wasn't just a young mother from Atlanta. She was the daughter of Marcus Carter Sr., one of the most powerful civil rights attorneys in America. Her family name carried weight in every courtroom, every boardroom, and every political circle from D.C. to California. Marcus Carter Sr. had taken down Fortune 500 companies, won landmark civil rights cases, and had the personal phone numbers of senators, governors, and Supreme Court justices. But even that wasn't the whole story, because Naomi had her own leverage, a fortune hidden in plain sight that no airline executive was prepared to face. The first sign came at 6 a.m. the next morning, when Naomi's legal team, not just her father but 12 of the most feared attorneys in corporate law, filed a $500 million lawsuit that made front-page news across the country. But that was just the opening move. Within 24 hours, she stood behind a podium at the Atlanta Press Club, baby Marcus on her hip, her father at her side, flanked by civil rights leaders whose very presence commanded respect. The room was packed beyond capacity, cameras from every major network focused on her face. "This isn't just about me," she said, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone born into power. "This is about every woman, every black mother who has been silenced, shamed, or dismissed. This is about the assumption that we don't belong in spaces we've paid to occupy. This is about the casual violence that happens when prejudice meets opportunity." Her words pierced through millions of television screens, shared and reshared across every social platform. Justice, for Naomi, became more than a hashtag. It became a rallying cry. The airline's stock began to hemorrhage value. Within 48 hours, shares had dropped 23%. Major sponsors, credit card companies, hotel chains, car rental agencies, began quietly pulling their partnerships. Politicians from both parties condemned the incident. What began as one slap had become a national reckoning about race, class, and corporate accountability. But the real blow was yet to come. Because Naomi had a secret the world didn't know, she wasn't just her father's daughter. She was a silent shareholder in Aerotech Holdings, one of the airline's biggest rival companies. Through a quiet trust fund left by her late grandmother, a brilliant businesswoman who had invested in aviation stocks in the 1960s, Naomi controlled assets worth nearly $100 million tied directly to the competition. The trust had been her grandmother's insurance policy. "Never let them tell you where you don't belong, baby girl," the elderly woman had whispered on her deathbed. And when they try to knock you down, make sure you own the ground they're standing on. When her attorneys filed the expanded lawsuit, it wasn't just against Sandra Mills, or even the airline. It was a masterclass in legal warfare that targeted the company's entire corporate structure. The lawsuit alleged systematic discrimination, inadequate training, and a culture of bias that violated federal civil rights laws. But buried in the fine print was a move so calculated it shocked the legal and business world. Naomi demanded not just monetary damages, but a transfer of routes, 15 of the airline's most lucrative flight paths worth over $2 billion annually, to Aerotech Holdings. The legal argument was brilliant. If the airline couldn't provide safe, discrimination-free service on these routes, they should forfeit them to a company that could. It was corporate punishment meets social justice, wrapped in litigation so airtight that Harvard Law School would later teach it as a case study. Executives panicked. Emergency board meetings were called. Investors revolted. The airline's top lawyers admitted they had never seen anything like it. Overnight, Naomi Carter became the face of both justice and corporate warfare. A David with the slingshot of generational wealth and legal expertise taking aim at Goliath. The revelations kept coming. Internal emails surfaced showing that Sandra Mills's behavior wasn't isolated. Company communications revealed coded language about managing certain demographics and maintaining cabin standards. Training materials contained implicit biases that civil rights experts called textbook discrimination. Airlines across the industry began quietly reviewing their own policies, terrified they might be next. And as for Sandra Mills? When called to testify 6 months later, she broke down completely on the witness stand. Under oath, with cameras rolling and the world watching, she admitted the unthinkable. She had been encouraged to keep difficult passengers in line by superiors who believed certain customers didn't belong in premium cabins. They told us in training, she sobbed, her career and reputation crumbling in real time. They said some people who looked like they couldn't afford first class, were probably using stolen credit cards or fake tickets. They told us to watch them more closely, to be more assertive. The admission was like a nuclear bomb in the courtroom. It exposed not just individual racism but systemic institutional discrimination that went to the very top of the company. Within hours, the CEO resigned. The head of training was fired. Congressional hearings were announced, but Naomi wasn't finished. She revealed her masterstroke during a primetime interview that 47 million people watched live. I'm donating every penny of my settlement, all $150 million, to establish the Marcus Carter Jr. Foundation for Aviation Equality, she announced, referring to her son who had been in her arms that day. We're going to train flight crews across America. We're going to audit airline policies. And we're going to make sure no mother, no passenger, no human being ever faces what I faced again. The foundation would go on to revolutionize aviation training nationwide. But her revenge against the airline was complete when, 18 months later, Aerotech Holdings officially acquired those 15 routes, making Naomi, through her trust, one of the youngest black women to control major airline assets in American history. By the time the gavel struck in the final court session, the airline wasn't just facing financial ruin. Its name had become a cautionary tale taught in every business school in America. The Naomi Carter case became required reading in management programs, a stark reminder of how one moment of prejudice could topple an empire. The airline that had once prided itself on being America's premium carrier was sold off in pieces, its assets scattered to competitors, its brand toxic beyond repair. Sandra Mills. She never worked in aviation again. But in a twist that surprised everyone, she became one of the most powerful advocates for racial sensitivity training in corporate America, spending the rest of her career trying to undo the damage she had caused. Naomi didn't just win. She rewrote the rules. She transformed a moment of humiliation into a movement for change. She turned her pain into power and her outrage into opportunity. The baby who had been crying in her arms that day, Marcus Carter Jr., would grow up never knowing a world where such discrimination was tolerated in aviation. And that, perhaps, was the greatest victory of all. Tell me, if you were in Naomi's place, armed with power, wealth, and justice on your side, would you have shown mercy or finished what they started? The answer might reveal more about justice than any of us are comfortable admitting. If you loved this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and share it with people around you. And trust me, you won't want to miss the next one. The stories of justice, revenge, and redemption are far from over. See you in my next video.